Away from Hong Kong, after 5 days of incessant protests on the streets of Lebanon, Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri appeared on national television to announce a series of belt-tightening measures aimed at allaying public figures. Now, they will be introduced in the country's next budget.
أعطيتها للشركاء بالحكومة ليمشي الحد الأدنى من الإجراءات الضرورية والمطلوبة من سنتين. هالإجراءات مشيت، منها بالموازنة يلي أقريناها اليوم، ومنها إجراءات أخذناها من خارج الموازنة.
Juggling between 9 coalition partners who represent divergent interests, Prime Minister Hariri had to put his foot down to push the reforms through. Here are some of the major announcements. Salaries of top officials, including lawmakers, will be cut by 50%. Several state institutions, including the Ministry of Information, has been abolished. The government will also be pumping in $160 million in the form of housing loans with the idea of reviving the construction sector. The country's next budget will aim to keep the deficit at a meager 0.6%, and to this end, the central bank as well as private players have been asked to dish out $3.3 billion in various projects. The Prime Minister even went on to say that he would support a snap election if the people wanted one.
وإذا كانت الانتخابات النيابية المبكرة هي مطلبكم ليكون صوتكم هو وحده يلي بيقرر، فأنا سعد الحريري شخصيا معكم بهالمطلب.
The protests were, however, having none of it. Demonstrations continued on the streets despite the reform package. They termed Prime Minister Hariri's announcement as lies and chanted down with the regime. Fearing violence and vandalism, banks, schools and businesses have also remained closed across the country. Lebanon is witnessing a revolution. Thousands have taken to the streets demanding an end to crippling economic conditions. The government has tried to pacify them with a series of moves, but protesters say that they will continue their agitation. They are demanding the fall of the government. More in this report. For 5 days now, these scenes have been a common sight in Lebanon. This is the biggest show of dissent in the country in decades. People have taken to the streets against the country's leaders, who they accuse of using their positions to enrich themselves for decades. They say they want an end to the rampant corruption and cronyism.
We did not go to the streets in vain. We are not closing down roads for nothing. We are people who have suffered a lot and gone through a lot to be able to come together as Lebanese.
Schools, banks and businesses were closed on Monday, and the main labor union was on strike. One of the main triggers for the protests was a proposed tax on WhatsApp calls and other messaging services. The proposed tax plan has been dropped. 4 ministers have stepped down, and the Prime Minister has promised reforms, including a 50% cut in the salaries of current and former presidents, ministers and lawmakers. But the moves have failed to pacify the protesters.
We have been threatened many times to open the road, but we will stay here and we won't open the road, whatever happens. Until the government falls, we will not open it.
We are on the ground and staying here. This is the most important thing we want to say. We are continuing in this movement, we won't back down, and we won't leave the streets until all the people's demands are met.
The economic crisis in the country runs deep. According to the Finance Ministry, Lebanon's public debt stands at around $86 billion, more than 150% of its gross domestic product or GDP. And it remains to be seen whether the government's promised reforms can rescue the country's economy and diffuse the spreading unrest on the ground. Bureau Report, Wion, World is One.